just indignation of a hairdresser. The worthy hairdresser who had chased from his shop the two little fellows to whom Gavroche had opened the paternal interior of the elephant was at that moment in his shop engaged in shaving an old soldier of the Legion who had served under the Empire. They were talking. The hairdresser had, naturally, spoken to the veteran of the riot, then of General Lamarck, and from Lamarck they had passed to the Emperor. Then sprang up a conversation between barber and soldier which Prudhomme, had he been present, would have enriched with arabesques, and which he would have entitled "Dialogue between the Razor and the Sword." "How did the Emperor ride, sir?" said the barber. "Badly. He did not know how to fall, so he never fell." "Did he have fine horses?" "He must have had fine horses. On the day when he gave me my cross, I noticed his beast. It was a racing mare, perfectly white. Her ears were very wide apart, her saddle deep, a fine head marked with a black star, a very long neck, strongly articulated knees, prominent ribs, oblique shoulders and a powerful crupper. A little more than 15 hands in height. A pretty horse," remarked the hairdresser. It was His Majesty's beast. The hairdresser felt that after this observation, a short silence would be fitting, so he conformed himself to it, and then went on. "The Emperor was never wounded but once, was he, sir?" The old soldier replied with the calm and sovereign tone of a man who had been there. "In the heel. At Ratisbon. I never saw him so well dressed as on that day. He was as neat as a new sou. And you, Mr. Veteran, you must have been often wounded." "I," said the soldier, "not to amount to anything. At Marengo, I received 2 saber blows on the back of my neck, a bullet in the right arm at Austerlitz, another in the left hip at Jena. At Friedland, a thrust from a bayonet, there, at the Moskowa 7 or 8 lance thrusts, no matter where, at Lutzen a splinter of a shell crushed one of my fingers. And then at Waterloo, a ball from a Biscayan in the thigh, that's all." "How fine that is!" exclaimed the hairdresser, in Pindaric accents, "to die on the field of battle. On my word of honor, rather than die in bed, of an illness, slowly, a bit by bit each day, with drugs, cataplasms, syringes, medicines, I should prefer to receive a cannon ball in my belly." "You're not over fastidious," said the soldier. He had hardly spoken when a fearful crash shook the shop. The show window had suddenly been fractured. The wigmaker turned pale. "Good God!" he exclaimed, "it's one of them." "What? A cannon ball?" "Here it is," said the soldier. And he picked up something that was rolling about the floor. It was a pebble. The hairdresser ran to the broken window and beheld Gavroche fleeing at the full speed, towards the Marché Saint-Jean. As he passed the hairdresser's shop, Gavroche, who had the 2 brats still in his mind, had not been able to resist the impulse to say good day to him, and had flung a stone through his panes. "You see," shrieked the hairdresser, who from white had turned blue, "that fellow returns and does mischief for the pure pleasure of it. What has anyone done to that gamin?" Chapter 4. The child is amazed at the old man. In the meantime, in the Marché Saint-Jean, where the post had already been disarmed, Gavroche had just effected a junction with a band led by Enjolras, Courfeyrac, Combeferre, and Fully. They were armed after a fashion. Bahorel and Jean Prouvaire had found them and swelled the group. Enjolras had a double-barreled hunting gun. Combeferre the gun of a National Guard bearing the number of his legion. And in his belt, 2 pistols which his unbuttoned coat allowed to be seen, Jean Prouvaire an old cavalry musket, Bahorel a rifle. Courfeyrac was brandishing an unsheathed sword cane. Fully, with a naked sword in his hand, marched at their head shouting, "Long live Poland!" They reached the quai moorland. Cravatless, hatless, breathless, soaked by the rain, with lightning in their eyes. Gavroche accosted them calmly. "Where are we going?" "Come along," said Courfeyrac. Behind Fully marched, or rather bounded, Bahorel, who was like a fish in water in a riot. He wore a scarlet waistcoat, and indulged in the sort of words which break everything. His waistcoat astounded a passer-by, who cried in bewilderment, "Here are the Reds!" "The Reds, the Reds!" retorted Bahorel. "A queer kind of fear, bourgeois. For my part, one don't tremble before a poppy. The little red hat inspires me with no alarm. Take my advice, bourgeois, let's leave fear of the red to horned cattle." He caught sight of a corner of the wall on which was placarded the most peaceable sheet of paper in the world. A permission to eat eggs, a Lenten admonition addressed by the Archbishop of Paris to his flock. Bahorel exclaimed, "Flock! A polite way of saying geese." And he tore the charge from the nail. This conquered Gavroche. From that instant Gavroche set himself to study Bahorel. "Bahorel," observed Enjolras, "you are wrong. You should have let that charge alone. He is not the person with whom we have to deal. You are wasting your wrath to no purpose. Take care of your supply. One does not fire out of the ranks with the soul any more than with a gun." "Each one in his own fashion, Enjolras," retorted Bahorel. "This bishop's prose shocks me. I want to eat eggs without being permitted. Your style is the hot and cold. I am amusing myself. Besides, I'm not wasting myself, I'm getting a start. And if I tore down that charge, Hercule, 'twas only to whet my appetite." This word, Hercule, struck Gavroche. He sought all occasions for learning, and the tear down of posters possessed his esteem. He inquired of him, "What does Hercule mean?" Bahorel answered, "It means cursed name of a dog, in Latin." Here Bahorel recognized at a window a pale young man with a black beard who was watching him as they passed, probably a friend of the ABC. He shouted to him, "Quick! Cartridges, parabellum!" "A fine man." "That's true," said Gavroche, who now understood Latin. A tumultuous retinue accompanied them, students, artists, young men affiliated to the Cougourde of Aix, artisans, longshoremen, armed with clubs and bayonets. Some, like Combeferre, with pistols thrust into their trousers. An old man, who appeared to be extremely aged, was walking in the band. He had no arms, and he made great haste, so that he might not be left behind, although he had a thoughtful air. Gavroche caught sight of him. "Qu'excès," said he to Courfeyrac. "He's an old duffer." It was M. Mabeuf. Chapter 5. The Old Man. Let us recount what had taken place. Enjolras and his friends had been on the boulevard Bourdon, near the public storehouses, at the moment when the dragoons had made their charge. Enjolras, Courfeyrac, and Combeferre were among those who had taken to the Rue Bassompierre, shouting, "To the barricades!" In the Rue Lesdiguières they had met an old man walking along. What had attracted their attention was that the goodman was walking in a zigzag, as though he were intoxicated. Moreover, he had his hat in his hand, although it had been raining all the morning, and was raining pretty briskly at the very time. Courfeyrac had recognized Father Mabeuf. He knew him through having many times accompanied Marius as far as his door. As he was acquainted with the peaceful and more than timid habits of the old beadle book collector, and was amazed at the sight of him in the midst of that uproar. a couple of paces from the cavalry charges. Almost in the midst of a fusillade. Hatless in the rain, and strolling about among the bullets, he had accosted him, and the following dialogue had been exchanged between the rioter of fire and the octogenarian. Mayberth, go to your home. Why? There's going to be a row. That's well. Thrusts with the sword and firing. Mayberth. That is well. Firing from cannon. That is good. Where are the rest of you going? We are going to fling the government to the earth. That is good. And he had set out to follow them. From that moment forth he had not uttered a word. His step had suddenly become firm. Artisans had offered him their arms. He had refused with a sign of the head. He advanced nearly to the front rank of the column, with the movement of a man who is marching and the countenance of a man who is sleeping. What a fierce old fellow! Muttered the students. The rumor spread through the troop that he was a former member of the convention, an old regicide. The mob had turned in through the Rue de la Verrerie. Little Gavroche marched in front with that deafening song which made of him a sort of trumpet. He sang. Voici la lune qui paraît. Quand irons now stands la forêt. Demandait Charlotte et Charlotte. Tu. Pour chatou. Je n'ai qu'un Dieu, qu'un roi, qu'un liard, et qu'une botte. Pour avoir bu de grande matin. La rosée et mime la thyme. De moineau éteint en ribot. Z. Pour passer. Je n'ai qu'un Dieu, qu'un roi, qu'un liard, et qu'une botte. Et c'est de pauvres petits loups. Comme de graves éteintes souls. Un tigre en riait dans sa grotte. Don. Pour me don. Je n'ai qu'un Dieu, qu'un roi, qu'un liard, et qu'une botte. L'une durate et l'autre sacrate. Quand irons now stands la forêt. Demandait Charlotte et Charlotte. Tin. Pour Panton. Je n'ai qu'un Dieu, qu'un roi, qu'un liard, et qu'une botte. Opening square bracket. Here is the morn appearing. When shall we go to the forest? Charlotte asked Charlotte. Two, for Chatou, I have but one God, one king, 1/2 farthing, and one boot. And these two poor little wolves were as tipsy as sparrows from having drunk dew and thyme very early in the morning. And these two poor little things were as drunk as thrushes in a vineyard. A tiger laughed at them in his cave. The one cursed, the other swore. When shall we go to the forest? Charlotte asked Charlotte. Closing square bracket. 46. They directed their course towards St. Mary. Chapter 6. Recruits. The band augmented every moment. Near the Rue des Billettes, a man of lofty stature, whose hair was turning grey, and whose bold and daring mien was remarked by Courfeyrac, Enjolras, and Combeferre, but whom none of them knew, joined them. Gavroche, who was occupied in singing, whistling, humming, running on ahead and pounding on the shutters of the shops with the butt of his triggerless pistol, paid no attention to this man. It chanced that in the Rue de la Verrerie, they passed in front of Courfeyrac's door. This happens just right, said Courfeyrac, I have forgotten my purse, and I have lost my hat. He quitted the mob and ran up to his quarters at full speed. He seized an old hat and his purse. He also seized a large square coffer, of the dimensions of a large valise, which was concealed under his soiled linen. As he descended again at a run, the portress hailed him. Monsieur de Courfeyrac. What's your name, portress? The portress stood bewildered. Why, you know perfectly well, I'm the concierge. My name is Mother Vevan. Well, if you call me Monsieur de Courfeyrac again, I shall call you Mother de Vevan. Now speak. What's the matter? What do you want? There is someone who wants to speak with you. Who is it? I don't know. Where is he? In my lodge. The devil! Ejaculated Courfeyrac. But the person has been waiting your return for over an hour, said the portress. At the same time, a sort of pale, thin, small, freckled, and youthful artisan, clad in a tattered blouse and patched trousers of ribbed velvet, and who had rather the air of a girl accoutred as a man than of a man, emerged from the lodge and said to Courfeyrac in a voice which was not the least in the world like a woman's voice, "Monsieur Marius, if you please. He is not here. Will he return this evening? I know nothing about it." And Courfeyrac added, "For my part, I shall not return." The young man gazed steadily at him and said, "Why not?" "Because." "Where are you going, then?" "What business is that of yours? Would you like to have me carry your coffer for you?" "I am going to the barricades." "Would you like to have me go with you?" "If you like," replied Courfeyrac. "The street is free, the pavements belong to every one." And he made his escape at a run to join his friends. When he had rejoined them, he gave the coffer to one of them to carry. It was only a quarter of an hour after this that he saw the young man, who had actually followed them. A mob does not go precisely where it intends. We have explained that a gust of wind carries it away. They overshot Saint-Merry and found themselves, without precisely knowing how, in the Rue Saint-Denis.